We'll start with a blessing. I'm in my sukkah, so we'll make the blessing in the sukkah, and I'll make it over juice, which I have with me today. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'akol niyah bidvaro. Okay. We're up to a very exciting part of Tanya. It's going to be chapter 19 of Tanya. Is that what, Robin, you have that as well? Just confirming? Okay, good. Okay. So we're in the middle of learning chapter 19 of Tanya. It's a really fascinating section where we're in the middle of learning that we all have innately this love that is dormant. It's love that's sleeping, but it's in our soul. It's vested in us. It's going through our bloodstream, this love for God. Problem is, it's sleeping many times. And that's why the reason why we get lax or get lazy or do things that we know we shouldn't be doing. But it's almost, we feel it's okay. It's nothing is going to happen. But when it awakens within a person, the feeling that, wait a minute, if I do this, I'm going to be severing my relationship with God. They, by hook or by crook, they're not going to want to do it. They're not going to want to fulfill and commit something that's going to separate them from God if they know it's going to separate them. So what we have to try and access is, how could it be? How can we manage to find within us that love and trigger it, not only during severe danger, spiritual danger times, but during a regular day? We could live with the fire of this love. And I've shared this before, but it's one of my favorite. It's an important thing. One of the main components that we're supposed to have within Judaism, that unfortunately, I'm not here to rebuke anyone, but it's just lacking. What we're supposed to have is a fire for God. We're all in whatever relationships we're in, whether with spousal or friends or parents or children, we have relationships. What happens ultimately, and for those that are not familiar, the reason why the background looks different than the usual is I'm in my sukkah, and we're learning Torah in the sukkah, which is nice. And there's a small breeze. I'm actually looking behind me. I see the walls moving ever so slightly. But we're learning from the sukkah today, which is the holiday of Sukkot. It's a good place to learn from. We actually this year put a sukkah on wheels. We've been driving around town. It's been very popular, safe and distance, but still people coming in, doing the mitzvah, and really getting the full experience of the holiday. What happens, just to go back what we were saying, is every now and then a relationship not necessarily gets stale, it just gets routine. And what happens when a relationship is routine, you do things without even realizing. Sometimes that's good, but sometimes you become very lax. And in Judaism, we always want to be, like Bernie Sanders, the politician. His election was "feel the burn." Going back a couple of years, was "feel the burn." And in Judaism, we need to feel our burn. We need to feel, in Yiddish, it's called the bren. We need to feel a fire. We have in us a fiery love for God, and we just need to sometimes access it and bring it out to the surface. Most of the time, it's sleeping. But in certain scenarios, it will come out. Our fire will be strong. For example, just a holiday, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, it accesses a certain love and a certain, just maybe it's hearing the cantor, or maybe it's just your own meditation, but there's a feeling there. Now, what we're saying is, even if the meditation is not going to work and it's not accessing that it's not making you excited, you have this love within you that in times of spiritual danger, it will come out. When you feel that you're going to be separated from God, it's going to be something that's going to come out. What we need to try to do is access it, and that's what chapter 19 is going to be about, is how do we access this fire, this love, during normal days, not only during danger times. The ending of last week, the chapter 18, we learned about the beauty of Chachma. We said that Chachma is the highest of all sefirot, of all divine powers, divine levels. Chachma is the top of it. It's that creative, open-minded, and part of us that we access with God. That it's almost like the beginning of an idea where it's too new and novel that we can't really pinpoint and describe to someone else what we're thinking. It's if someone distracts you at that moment, you're actually going to forget about the idea totally. You're not going to even remember what it is. It's not tangible yet. It's not analyzed yet. It's not comprehended yet. That would be the stage of Bina. And we compared that to even just in the male and female relationship. The male just gives the seed, and the female in the womb grows that and develops it. So it's almost the same. You have a seed of wisdom, the seed of an idea. That's chachma. Bina is where the joy comes in, because now it's analyzed, now it's understood. And actually, King David, he says that the mother, the female, is like the level of bina. And we see this just the way men and women are. Men could have great ideas, but the implementation of it always comes from the woman. We see this, not always, that's obviously very generalized, but take a barbecue, for example. The man's like, oh, I will make a barbecue today. And he takes all the credit for standing outside for 5 minutes and doing the barbecue. But there's so much of it that is planned. And from the details I know with Adina, like she plans all the parts out and gets the tomatoes ready and marinates and everything, and I just do the little part. But the woman is the one that thinks things through. It's the world of Bina. It's a very high level. So what we're trying to get to is accessing this dormant love. I'm getting a little veered off, so we're gonna try to stick to the text now. Chapter 19. If you're looking in the book, it's going to be the bottom of 219. All the way at the bottom, chapter 19 is section 1, what chachma feels like. And we're also going to pull it up on the screen in case that's helpful for anyone. And let me see where that is on the screen. Oh, it's going to be all the way at the top of the page. Okay, I hope everyone can see the screen now, if that's helpful for you. Dormant love. Wait a minute, that's chapter 18. So that's correct. Let's switch to chapter 19. What chachma feels like. That looks a lot better. Okay. Section 1. The defining property of dormant love. In chapter 18, we were introduced to the idea of a dormant love present in our souls as an inheritance from the patriarchs. The Tanya posed 4 questions about this love, seeking an explanation for A, the root of this love, B, its defining property, C, why it is our inheritance, and D, why it includes also an inherited capacity for reverence. In the previous chapter, we were given an elaborate answer to question A, the love, which the answer was the love is rooted in the soul's chachma. That's where the root of this love is coming from. And we also got an answer to question C, that it's inherited from the patriarchs because of their utter dedication to God. But now B and D were not yet answered, which is that what is its defining property, and how does it also add any reverence? Hold on, side here. Chapter 19 will offer an explanation for questions B and D. First, we turn to question B. What is the defining property of dormant love? So this is going to be a great topic, understanding what this love, what is the property of it. To elucidate further the idea of dormant love present in our souls, we first need to clarify the verse. It says in Proverbs, which is from King Solomon, it says, Adam's soul is God's candle. So again, the words in Hebrew is Ner Hashem, which is the candle of God. Nishmat Adam is Adam's soul. So Adam's soul is God's candle. We all know this. Let me just explain. Now we all know this. Let me explain a little bit first and say what we all know. Adam means Adam, the first man that lived, the first human. But also Adam also means a person. Over here, we're translating it as Adam as the person, as the human being, the Homo sapien that lived, the soul of Adam. But in general, all of our souls is the flame of God. And for that reason, when a yahrzeit comes around for a parent or a loved one or a grandparent, we light a candle, because a candle is the perfect symbol of a soul. So I don't know how elaborate he's going to get on that part, but he's going to be definitely elaborating on Adam's soul and how Adam's soul is the root of our soul. So let's see what that means. And I think that was brought up in chapter 18. One of us brought that up. So that's a good one also. This means that the souls of Israel, which are referred to as Adam, that's from the Talmud, are comparable to the flame of a candle. Are comparable to the flame of a candle, which by nature continually flickers upwards. I just want to elaborate on this Talmud. I find this to be a beautiful idea. If you didn't hear me explain this before, it's just a power of unity that comes out from this Talmud. I want to explain something. And the reason why I wanted to take a minute and dedicate to explaining this is right now we're celebrating the holiday of Sukkot. Sukkot is all about unity. For those that had the opportunity to sit in the sukkah, and I know actually Vivian and Maddie, if you're both on the call, I went to the Safeway in South Nevada. I didn't bring the sukkah with me, but I have the sukkah with me throughout all the other stops. Today I'll be at Costco from 11 to 12 with the sukkah mobile, and tomorrow I think I'm going to Nugget Market. But I'll make sure I'll take side streets and we'll go through the entire town. So the beauty of the sukkah is that it has the power of embracing the entire person, equal to everyone else, which means there's some mitzvahs, let's say charity. People give it with more intention or more money, and they got a better mitzvah, let's say, or prayers. People have more kavanah, more mindfulness, and their prayers could reach a higher source. When it comes to sukkah, the beauty is a wise scholar or a simple child fulfill the mitzvah equally. It's just sitting in the sukkah, you get the mitzvah, and it's totally embracing the entire person. So it's equal of a mitzvah uniting people from all walks of life. It's a power of the beautiful mitzvah. With explaining that, there's a beautiful story that is around this Talmud. So again, this Talmud is saying here that Adam, when it says Adam, it's referring to the Jewish people, to the souls of Israel. Now, that's a little odd because why can't Adam, which simply would mean a person, why can't it refer to other souls as well, not just the souls of Israel? So it's an odd statement of the Talmud that the souls of Israel are called Adam, are called people or person. And this was actually used, this Talmud was used against the Jewish people in 1912, just over 100 years ago. This was a very, very big, dangerous lawsuit that were filed in the olden days. This was actually the last blood libel in 1912, 1913. Hundreds of years ago, there was something that was very, very, unfortunately, very common, very popular, was something that was called blood libel. Some of you are probably familiar with it, is when around the holiday of Passover, Jews in communities would be libeled. They would take a Jew and they would libel. They would say that they killed a Christian child and used its blood for the matzah, making. Now, of course, it's preposterous. Blood is not kosher, and for sure, murder is not allowed. But they would. This happened, unfortunately, too many times when they would take a Christian child and kill a Christian child in their communities, and with the hope of framing a Jew and saying that, look, he took the child's blood. So this was famous in the 1500s in Prague. Some of you are familiar with the Golem of Prague. The Maharal, Rabbi Yehuda Loew, who was the chief rabbi of Prague in Czechoslovakia, in olden day Czechoslovakia, he formed this golem in order to protect the Jewish community from these blood libels, which was rampant then. It was crazy. So the last official blood libel was in 1912. There was a man, if I'm not mistaken, this was in the Ukraine. His name was Menachem Beilis, and he was accused of a blood libel. He was accused of using Christian blood for his matzah. So, but they realized this went to court, and the court system was not that Jewish friendly. They weren't that such good friends of the Jews, as you can imagine. And but they realized through the proceedings and the claims that this wasn't just a claim against an individual Jew, it was a claim against the Jewish world, the Jewish community. And their lawyers, the non-Jewish lawyers, were actually using quotes of the Talmud to go against and to show that the Jewish people are not good citizens or something. So one of the things that they said is that if you look in this Talmud, it says that you, the Jewish people, the souls of Israel, are called Adam, are called people. So it almost seems to be saying that non-Jews are not called people. So they use that as a claim. Look, we don't even respect them. Of course, they would kill our blood. They would kill little Christian children because their Talmud condones it. That was, God forbid, their claim. So the Jewish lawyers didn't know an answer to that. How do you explain that Talmud? So they actually brought it to one of the leading rabbis in the early 1900s. His name was Rabbi Meir Shapiro. He became very known. He instituted around a decade after, in the mid 1920s, he instituted the concept of studying a page of Talmud a day and finishing it in a cycle of around 7.5 years. It's called the Daf Yomi, but he started it. So he was a very prominent rabbi. So they went to him and they asked him to explain this Talmud. And he said a beautiful teaching that I just find, let me just stop sharing for a moment. He said a beautiful teaching that I find it just very relevant is with the holiday of Sukkot and the power of unity. He said that in Hebrew, there's actually 4 terms that could be used to explain a person. One is called a gever, that's a man, or geveret is a woman, but that's one term. So gever would be the singular version of saying a person, like sure, or gevarim would be many people, many men. Ish or anashim, you have Adam. Ish would be Ish would be in the singular, Ishim would be in the plural, or Enosh and Anashim. Enosh would be one person, and Anashim would be many people. And then you have Adam. What's amazing is there's 4 terminologies to describe a person, to define a person. 3 of them have a singular and a plural version of it. So like Gever or Gevarim, Enosh or Anashim, Ish or Ishim. It's the singular and the plural. But Adam, it means the same in the singular and the plural. There's no plural for the word Adam. Adam means a person, like Adam, but there's no plural for that word. It means the same in singular and plural. So Rabbi Shapiro explained for the defense of Menachem Beilis, he said what this Talmud is saying is that the Jewish people have something incredible, that we always stick together. Through the worst of times, with fragmentation and utter atrocities happening in the world, the Jewish people, we feel for each other. There could be a story of a Jew in Australia that is going through a tough time. I feel my heart, I want to support them. I want to help. I want to rally around them. And now, of course, every single person in the world is deserving of sympathy and empathy. But of course, when it's your own family, you feel it more. And the Jewish people are like one unit, are like one person, like one body. So what Rabbi Shapiro explained is that when the Talmud says that only the Jewish people are called Adam, what that means is only we could be in the singular no matter what. Any other term of a person could be for any person, man or woman, Jew or non-Jew. It has a plural and the singular. But for the Jewish people, we are all referred to in the singular, Adam, because we're all one unit, no matter what and no matter where, no matter what point of history. So, and that was a very well-received explanation for the court. And I don't know if that was the vindication of it, but he ended up getting, he was innocent. He was obviously proven innocent. And the court, the judge in the Ukraine, if I'm not mistaken, he ruled that this is the last libel ever to take place, because this is preposterous that we're in the 20th century and we're still claiming these false libels. Anyway, I just thought I would explain this idea. It's the same quote of the Talmud that was used against us, but it's a beautiful quote saying that the Jewish people are called Adam. And all right, so we'll continue sharing again. And let me just see. Okay. I hope that was somewhat clear. You could ask me questions if that wasn't clear. Okay, so what it says over here is like this. We're on the towards the top of the page. This means that the souls of Israel, which are referred to as Adam, are comparable to the flame of a candle, which by nature continually flickers upwards. The Tanya now offers an explanation why the flame of a candle tends to flicker, as if it is trying to rise upward and detach itself from the wick. It's the coolest thing about a flame. Whatever direction you're holding the flame, it's always going to point upward. So you can even, I don't have the flame with me now, but let's say this was the tip of the flame. Even if you go like this, the flame would still go upward. The natural tendency of the flame is to rise, no matter what. And it almost is rising to the point where it's like trying to jump off of the wick. And the wick is just holding it down. But the flame is always flickering. The flame is always jumping. So let's see what that means inside. The way the Alter Rebbe learns it here. Because a fire's flame is naturally inclined to detach itself from the wick, so as to connect with its root above. in the core element of fire, which is below the moon's orbit. So this is going to be, I think some of you will enjoy this, learning about the orbit and the source and the element of fire, where it comes from. In the classical model, the universe is seen as divided into two parts: the terrestrial region, which includes the Earth and everything surrounding it, up to the moon's orbit, and the celestial region, which accounts for everything beyond the moon's orbit. Like the first verse of the Torah, it says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth includes the whole Earth orbit. The heavens refer to the celestial region, what's above. So everything in the terrestrial region, realm, which is in our world, is composed of four elements: earth, fire, air, and water. Since rest is the natural state of the terrestrial matter, earth, air, and water tend to seek their natural place at rest in the center of the earth, unless stopped by an impenetrable surface like the ground. But so that's like pulling down towards the surface of the earth, towards the center. But the natural resting place of elemental fire is above us in the higher part of the terrestrial realm, beneath the moon's orbit. So this explains why a flame tends to flicker, as if it is trying to detach itself from the wick, because by nature it is drawn to its elemental root above the earth. So I don't know if you could quote me on this, but it's the only thing that's not pulled by gravity. You could correct me if I'm wrong, but everything tends to fall low. Everything is going to be pulled towards the earth, because in the terrestrial realm, everything from air, water, and earth are pulling towards the center, unless there's obviously something blocking it, but otherwise it would try to make its way back to the core of the earth, or the center of the earth. But fire is rooted below the moon's orbit, the highest place of the terrestrial realm, and that's why fire always rises to get back to its source. So it's like everything is trying to get back to her source, and the source of fire is above, and that's where the flame flickers upwards. So it's a pretty cool idea. This was written in the 1700s, just when the theory, a lot of theories were coming out, but it's pretty cool to see this here. And he's actually going to quote this now from the Eitz Chaim. The Eitz Chaim was written by the holy Arizal, Rabbi Isaac Luria. It was actually written by a student, but it was taught by the Isaac Luria, who died in Tzafat, the north of Israel, in the 1500s, in 1572. That's pretty cool to have these teachings already from there about the terrestrial realm, the celestial realm, and that in the terrestrial realm there's fire, air, water, and earth. The fire is rooted above, just below the moon's orbit, whereas others are rooted in the earth, in the terrestrial realm below, and therefore they're always trying to get back to their sources. Okay. The classical model was embraced by the sages all the way back to the Midrash, which was written 2,500 years ago, and was employed extensively by the Jewish medieval philosophers. Here, the Tanya notes that this model was also used by Lurianic Kabbalah. So we know there's Kabbalah, which is Jewish mysticism, but there's different, not templates, but different dimensions, I guess, of Kabbalah. One of the famous ones is Lurianic, because it comes from Rabbi Isaac Luria, who taught a path of Kabbalah. I hope that makes sense. So, but in Lurianic Kabbalah, this idea of the classical model, that the terrestrial realm, the celestial realm, and the root of them all, where fire, water, air, and earth, which are all part of the terrestrial realm, where they come from, that's emphasized a lot during medieval Kabbalah, philosophers, and also by Kabbalistic teachers from the 1500s and on. Okay. And even though by leaving its wick and uniting with its source, the flame would be extinguished and would cease to shine at all down here, and even above, once reabsorbed in its source, in the core element of fire, the identity of the flame's light would dissolve to its source, in its source. Nevertheless, this is what the flame is naturally inclined to do. So just to explain this, the flame is trying to flicker, trying to jump off the wick, and trying to make its way to its source, which is above, under the moon's orbit, and leave the wick. Now, even though when it leaves the wick, it's not going to be able to be a flame anymore. It's going to go back to its source. The identity would dissolve. There's no more identity of the flame anymore because now it's part of its source. Still, that's what it wants. Remember, we're going to get back to the soul over here because the flame is compared to the soul. That's what Solomon said. But what we see in the flame is something incredible. The wick is what's holding it down. The flame is trying to flicker, trying to jump away from the wick and to reconnect in its root, even if it means it's going to be extinguished from the wick, and even if it means having to leave and be dissolved. So let's see that a little more. The flame's tendency is to reunite with its higher source, even though this would result in the physical flame being extinguished. In fact, even the flame's spiritual identity would be erased as it is reabsorbed in its source in the element of fire. Is there any questions on this before we continue? Because it's obviously it's there's a little bit of science here, which is just the natural tendency of flames. That's something that no one could deny. It's just the way the flame is always running upwards, always jumping, always flickering. But what's amazing from here is the realization that where is it jumping? You know, in Yiddish, there's an expression, it's on spilkes. A flame is never calm. A flame is always jumping. It's always flickering. It's always on spilkes. It's like on pins and needles would be the translation of it. And the Alter Rebbe is saying from Kabbalistic sources and beyond that it's because it's trying to go back to its source. Everything tries to go back to their source. And if actually, I don't know if he's going to bring this example here, but if you make a bonfire, usually around the holiday of Lag BaOmer, which is a Kabbalistic day celebrating Kabbalah, it's the passing of the author of Kabbalah, of the Zohar. His name is Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. And the Zohar, which is a Kabbalistic book, means brightness, bright. So we actually make bonfires on this day, symbolizing the illumination of Torah through Kabbalah. And I'm always mesmerized by the fact that when you have a beautiful bonfire and there's little sparks that are around the flame, they all try to get the sparks get consumed in the big flame in the bonfire. They all get like those crackles and the flames, and then they get jumped into the big fire. Even though when the spark gets back in the flame, it's going to lose its identity. It's not a spark anymore. It's just part of a bigger bonfire. But that's what it wants. It always goes back to their source. That's what happens. That's just a fact. So over here he's saying that that's the flame's tendency. It's to go back to its source, even if it means that it will be extinguished because it's no longer held down by the wick. That's what it wants. So look how the Rebbe explains the same with our soul. This is the science of the soul. In the same way, a person's higher soul power of neshama, as well as even the lower soul powers of ruach and nefesh, naturally yearn and desire to be separated from the body and to leave it. Our soul doesn't want this. Our soul wants to leave, so as to attach themselves with the soul's root and source in God, the giver of life, may he be blessed. Isn't that amazing? So we can't stop here, but and we'll have to see what keeps our soul in our body and realizing our real purpose. We'll have to get there. But over here, the natural tendency of the soul is saying, what do I need in this body? What do I need the world for? I want to go back to my source. So that's the three chambers of the soul, which we explained there's five. Over here is quoting through the three lower ones, which is nefesh, ruach, and neshama. Those soul powers yearn to be separated from the body. So it's almost like just in the comparison of the flame and the wick, the flame is like the soul, the wick is like the body. The wick is holding down the flame, but the flame wants to leave it. The soul is being held down by the body, right? We put food in our body that keeps our soul in the body. We breathe and it keeps the harmony between soul and body. But on its own, the soul wants to leave it. Its desire is to go back to its source, which is all the soul powers from on high. Intuiting, I think that's how you pronounce that word, its source in God to be a superior level of existence than bodily incarnation. The soul naturally desires it, right? The soul wants to be part of the existence of God. Even though by departing from the body and being reabsorbed in its source, the soul powers would become null and void. That's a quote from Isaiah. In Hebrew, the words are ayin and ephes. If the soul leaves this body, it doesn't have its soul powers anymore. Right? Its soul powers, the soul can think, and the soul can feel when it's in this world. It could see when it's in this world. It'll lose its soul powers, and the soul would completely lose its identity there, and nothing would remain of its original character and substance once absorbed in its source. Nevertheless, this departure from the body towards the source is its natural will and desire. That's what the soul wants. Just like the flame wants to leave the wick, even though it would lose its identity and it would just be consumed in the source of fire under the moon's orbit. The same is with the soul. The soul wants to leave the body and you reconnect and be part of the original source of the soul in God's divine light, even though it would lose its identity. When does a soul's character is emphasized? When it's here. Above, it's just going to be part of the bigger godly light that doesn't really have its identity anymore. Still, that's what it wants. Amazing. Just as the flame is inclined to leave its wick and be reabsorbed in its source, even though this would result in its identity being erased, the soul desires likewise. So the description, we're towards the bottom of the page on the screen. Okay, and let's see, continue. The description of this tendency of the flame and the soul is as a nature is non-literal, referring to anything which is not the product of reasoning and logic. The desire of your identity to be dissolved in its source is not a rational one. It is an experience to which you are drawn intuitively and naturally. Let's just ponder those words. See if that makes sense to anyone here. So this description that it has a nature, that the natural soul's desire is to go back to its source, and the natural flame wants to leave the wick. I'm assuming that's what he means. This word that we're saying that it has a natural desire, it's not literal because it's not the product of reasoning. The desire of your identity to be dissolved in a source is not, it's not a rational one. You can't explain rationally why your soul would want to leave this world. It's intuitive, and it's an intuition that just your soul feels that. So I'm not sure exactly how to explain that. If anyone has any thoughts on that. Let's see.
Rabbi, is it our soul? Is it that our soul feels it, or is it that it's our time is up from God? Or is that the same thing?
Say again, what's the first part of your question? If your soul feels what? When you say your soul feels it, yeah.
When it's time to leave the body, your soul intuitively feels it. Is that it, or is it that, or is it that God, it's written, your time is up?
I think it's also not. I think if I'm understanding correctly, your soul has that intuition not only the time when your time here is up, just naturally, like the soul's natural inclination is to be cleaving to its source. Your soul naturally, not only after 120, but generally, naturally, the intuition of your soul is to cleave to its source, just like the flame naturally wants to be connected to its source, and therefore the flame is always flickering upwards, almost saying, I'm trying to jump out of the wick. The soul also, I think, intuition, her intuition, the intuition of the soul, is to be connected to its source, even if it means it's going to leave this world. Not that we're not condoning it. We shouldn't be doing that. But that's a natural. I think it's just the soul would just feel more comfortable in its source, just like a baby feels the most comfortable in its mother's arms. And
I absolutely,
go ahead.
I was going to say I absolutely love that, because for some reason, when it says like in Yom Kippur, the book of life is sealed, and I've always kind of thought that that it's there's nothing I can do about it, or it's my fate or whatever. But at the same time, what you're saying on a spiritual level, really, it's like, it might be written, but it's also intuitively we just feel that it's our time. I don't know if even this makes sense.
For sure. Well, if you're talking about it by 120, it actually says the soul already prepares itself 3 days before. The soul is already preparing itself. So besides for, if a person is ill and God forbid the body is shutting down, which is, normal, not normal, but it's a process. But the soul somehow, like I spoke to people whose family member passed away suddenly, and it's like, 3 days before or 2 days before, the person was sharing things that they've never shared before, saying things, and almost like the soul is preparing for it. But over here, I think we're just saying that not only by close to 120, just the soul naturally feels its comfort zone in its source, and it feels the most comfortable there, and it's trying to experience that, and it's in her natural intuition. We have to see a little more.
Yeah.
I'm struggling a little bit to explain it fully because I want to see the direction of where the Alter Rebbe is going. But so far, what we know is the symbol of the flame being the soul of a person is the symbol that, just like a flame is always trying to get back to its source, the soul also has its source in the heavenly realms and is trying to get back there, right? That's going to be the world of Chachma that we're going to be learning about. Yeah.
And what's the symbol of 120? What's that about?
That's actually a good question. Next week, we're actually restarting the cycle of the Torah. We have Simchas Torah on Sunday, so we roll the Torah all the way back, and we start again the cycle of the year. And so originally, and when I say originally, I mean in the first 1,500 years of the world, God actually gave humanity an incredible amount of time to make a difference in the world. I'm talking about like 900 years, 800 years, like crazy years. You see in the Chumash that we use in synagogue and shul, you see they have like the charts. You see the lifespan of the first 1,000 years, like of Adam and that generation was like close to 1,000 years. And then you see a decline where it came the time of Noah, and God was utterly unimpressed with what we were doing with our time. And he basically sentenced and says, I'm going to make the span of a person's life 120 years. And really, my sermon of Rosh Hashanah was along these lines. It's not the amount of time you have, it's what you're doing with your time, right? A person could only live to 40, but accomplish incredible things in the world. Like think of Rachel, our matriarch, or Arizal, Rabbi Isaac Luria, who you quoted before. They both lived to 37 years old. But yeah, we talk about them for eternity, because it's not the amount of years that they had; it's what they did with what they did, the value of what they did with their years. So God was realizing that they weren't utilizing their time, and says, you know what, I'm going to give them less time, and then they're going to realize how much more valuable time is, and hopefully that will help. So God actually, in the ending of the first Torah portion of Bereshis, the portion of Genesis, God actually says, I'm going to make the lifespan of man and of humanity 120. So the prime people, Moses, lived to 120. Rabbi Akiva lived to 120. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, Hillel, the elder, if you remember, if you ever heard of Hillel from the Talmud, they lived to 120, which is the, I don't know if it's the maximum, but that's the prime of years. Moshe lived and died. He was born and died on the same day, on his 120th birthday. But for some reason, I'll just add a little more. I don't know why, but in Hasidic circles, like in Chabad circles, we actually wish people to live till 180. I don't know, maybe they like the number 10 times 18. 180 is a better number. I don't know. I never heard of anyone that lived that long in the past couple centuries since we recorded these dates. But I don't know. Did I answer your question even, Maddie? How do we get to 120? I'm hoping I did. Okay. Okay, sorry about that.
Yes, this is great. Totally. Thank you so much.
All right, so we're at the top of the page. You're welcome. Here, too, a reference to the soul's natural will and desire implies that the soul's will and desire is not the product of reasoning. Oh, I love this. The soul's desire is not part of reasoning and logic. A graspable, I never even knew that was a word, a graspable and intelligible rationale. Rather, it transcends logic, and any graspable, I have to check that up in the dictionary. I never thought that would be a real word, or intelligible rationale. Cool. So let me just explain this point, and then we'll summarize it with the next paragraph. What we're saying here is that it makes no sense for the soul to say, I want to leave this world and be connected to my source. It doesn't. The soul knows that if it leaves this world, it's not going to be able to have its character and identity anymore. But yet, it's not a rational thing. We're not dealing with rationale. We're dealing with something that is a desire of the soul. The soul's desire and yearn is to cleave to its source. That's what the godly soul wants. You can't explain it logically. We now have an answer to question B posed in the previous chapter. What is the defining property of the soul's dormant love? The answer is it is an intrinsic rational desire of the soul to leave the body and be reunited with its source in God. So the way the Alter Rebbe made this point was stunning. But just to explain it, you have rationale, which is the way we think logically, we grasp with our intelligence, etc. Then you have something that's illogical, something that's lower than logic. When someone acts crazy and is a lunatic and is being a fool, that's below rationale. But then over here, we're talking about supra rationale. I don't know exactly how to translate supra, but it means like above rationale. It's like what's beyond. So over here, the soul's desire to cleave to its source is not rational. What it is it's above. It's super rational. It's the intrinsic desire of the soul to leave. The way we prove this point is from the flame. Solomon said in the Torah, in the book of Proverbs, that the soul of a man, of Adam, of humanity, is the flame of God. So just like a flame, that's where we light yahrzeit candles from, right? Just like a flame, when you look at a flame, you're seeing the combination of a wick holding the flame together. Without the wick, if the flame manages to jump off the wick, there's no more flame. Where does that flame go? It goes to its source, even though it means it's extinguished. But that's still what the flame wants. The soul wants to go back to its source, even though that would mean the soul's identity, personality, and character, the way it is in this world, would be gone. But that's still what the soul wants. So now we have an answer to this. The soul has this dormant love. And what is it? It's a desire to cleave to God. It's super rational. So now, section 2, why your love could remain dormant. So that's a pretty powerful level. We have a fire in our soul. It's the love of God, and its desire is to jump to God, to go back to its source. So what happens? Why don't we feel it? That's going to be a good question. Section 2, why your love could remain dormant. If all the souls are naturally drawn to God, why doesn't everyone believe in him? In the following section, the Tanya will explain that certain conditions need to be met for the soul's properties to be available and manifest. So it's not always present. You need to access it. It needs to become available. What does it take? Let's find out. As we learned in chapter 18, the root of the soul's super rational intuition and faith is its component of chachma. Okay, good. That's good. It's getting back to chachma. Where does this component of the soul come from? It's from chachma, which is the source of the soul, and that's where it gets its super rational logic. Sorry, not logic. Super rational intuition. We learned that in chapter 18, where we learned chachma is that seed that is beyond analysis. Chachma, we even translate it as koachma. It's a power, but what is it? You can't describe it. It's beyond bina, which is where the comprehension, the logic, the intelligence, and the analysis of it comes. Chachma is beyond it. Bina complements chachma, but on its own, chachma is more the source of faith and what goes beyond logic. So the soul stems from this level of chachma, and we all access it, right? Do you remember I think the wording we used was how all the soul levels are interconnected. So even though chachma is the highest, and our soul may be on the lowest of levels, depending on a lot of factors of where our soul was manufactured, but ultimately it all comes back, it all is connected to its original source, which is chachma. So we have this natural chachma of our soul, which is the source of our soul. This chachma is where we get our super rational faith in God from. And it's a great time to be speaking about this faith because the sukkah is the reboot of faith. Sukkah is God's commandment and mitzvah to the Jew saying, leave the comforts of your home, the air conditioner and the beautiful art pictures on your walls, and go to a hut that is flimsy. If anyone has been in my Sukkah-mobile, it's pretty flimsy. And you expose yourself to the elements, and you become vulnerable. And that's such a power of faith, because some people, they feel, in the words of the Torah, is kochi v'otzem yadi. It's my own strength and powers that I got where I am. I'm a self-made man, and you take full credit, and you should be very proud of yourself. But ultimately, realize that it's God that gives you your blessings, because people thought they were multimillionaires with the stock market, and they realized quite quickly in 2020 that it's not all their God. They don't worship the stock market. That's not what makes the plans. Ultimately, it's God. So our faith in God is something that we are reminded to in the Sukkah. And this power of faith is from the level of the soul, the highest of levels, which is called Chachma, and it's connected to God's infinite light. And we are connected to it. So you are infinity, in other words. The root of the soul is back inside. The root of the soul's super-rational intuition and faith is its component of Chachma, in which the blessed infinite light of God is found. The soul is drawn powerfully to its source in God because the soul has Chachma within it. Chachma acts as a window, allowing God's light into the soul, offering a direct, embodied experience of the infinite. I love this word. Chachma is a window. God's infinity and God's infinite light is accessed into your soul by ways of Chachma. Chachma allows God's infinity in you. You are embodying it. It's amazing. You could meditate on that. It's a lot of cool stuff there. But once, I'm on the next page of the Kindle now, but once the light has come into your soul through its window, if the light is to continue flowing through the rest of your psyche, you must make yourself a suitable receptacle for it. So now Chachma allows God's infinite light. In Hebrew, it's called Ein Sof, which means there is no end to God's light. That no-ended light comes into your soul. But if you want that soul, that light, to flow to the rest of your embodiment, you have to be a receptacle for it. So it's there, but you have to tap into it. You have to allow it access. So we're going to end the class with this, hopefully with this page. And the following is a fundamental principle with all the forces of holiness. Now, what is the fundamental principle? That you must make yourself a receptacle for the light. To understand, to understand how to make yourself a container for the blessed infinite light, which enters your soul through its window of Chachma, we first need to learn a fundamental principle. All right, so join me for the ride as we learn this principle. The fundamental principle is the forces of holiness are exclusively derived from Chachma. Chachma is not merely a route to holiness, it is the route to holiness. Everything in the universe that is sacred must flow from Chachma. So Chachma is the way, the route to achieve holiness. As we find that Chachma itself is actually referred to as supernal holiness in the Zohar. In Hebrew, the words are Kodesh Elyon, since it is the root of everything holy. So just to explain this, it's getting a little Kabbalistic here. I hope you're on board. We have Chachma, which is the root for any holiness for us to feel. So the fundamental principle is holiness is derived from Chachma. The way to access holiness, supernal holiness, is and which is the root for everything holy, that is through Chachma. Chachma is the entry point. Chachma is the root to access. What is Chachma about? Let's continue. And as we have explained, this is because Chachma's own identity is voided by the blessed infinite light present within it, so that it doesn't feel itself to be an independent thing from God, as explained above. So this is going back to one of the best words we've been using in Tanya, which is bittul, which is surrender, humility, and voidness. I don't know if that's a real word, but being voided of yourself allows God in. When you are too full of yourself, it can't receive God's light. To receive God's light, you have to be humble. You have to be a cleansed vessel. What cleans your vessel? That's Chachma. That's the humility that comes through Chachma. So Chachma, which literally means wisdom, but we've been translating it in Tanya as the inquiry. To inquire, you need to go outside of yourself. You need to be opening yourself up, surrendering to something else. So God's infinite light is accessed in Chachma, which is this humility, and from there you're able to channel it into the rest, depending on if we take this fundamental principle seriously. But the force of holiness is accessed through Chachma. That's the route to holiness. If I want to achieve holiness, it can't start with my ego. It needs to start with Chachma. And by the way, it's literally 6 months away, but the beautiful holiday of Pesach is exactly this point. We eat matzah because matzah is the bread of affliction. Matzah is humbled. Matzah is flat. Unlike challah, which is expanded and yeast rises, matzah symbolizes humility and flatness. So we eat matzah because we're at the Passover, which celebrates our freedom. We are starting our journey of holiness, and it starts with humility. It starts with chachma. Once you access chachma, you could carry it on and embody it to the rest, but it has to start with humility. If you are independent of God, you're not allowing God in. You need to be one with God, and the way to be one is through surrender. Okay, and as we have explained, this is why it is referred to as, in Hebrew, the words are chachma, is koach ma. If you take the word chachma, you break it in two. We explained this in chapter 18 already. Koach means the power, ma means what? Because it's the power, ability to say, what is this? Which is an inquisitiveness and openness to the unknown. The tendency to openness comes when you empty the ego, because the ego is always sure of itself. I love this. Awesome stuff. I see that I missed a practical lesson. Actually, I missed two. So I'm going to stop sharing just to summarize and to read a practical lesson or two. And this will be a good summary also. If you're looking in the book, it's on page 221. There's a little sidebar with a practical lesson, and it's just a few words, but it's powerful. It says like this: your soul is naturally drawn to God, like a flickering flame that yearns to depart from its wick. So our soul is like a flame. A flame naturally yearns to go to its source. A soul naturally has a tendency to go to her source, which is God, drawn to God. One other practical lesson in the book, it's on page 223 now. You could also follow along or just listen. It says like this: the power of Chachma in your soul acts as a window to God's light, offering a direct, embodied experience of the infinite. So we have an experience of infinite that I could achieve and you can, and that's through Chachma. What is Chachma? That's exactly what it is. What is it? Chachma is the power to say, what is it? To look outside of you, to be inquisitive, and to be null of your ego. The more null of your ego you are, the more embodied of holiness you can be. So it starts with Chachma, because Chachma is that plateau of nothingness, of allowing God's infinite light in. And God gifted every one of us this Chachma. That's where our soul comes from this level of Chachma that is the foundation of our soul. What happens is it could get covered up with our own ego, but we need to tap into it. We'll continue learning next week about how to tap into this level. Sorry, guys. Here we go. I'll wish you, well,